Sometimes we have to trust God for what seems impossible. Maybe it's the wayward child that feels like they've gone so far that you'll never get them back. Maybe it's the sickness that just won't go away. Maybe it's the marriage that's on the rocks and you have no hope that it will ever work again. Today, we're going to see Jacob is right there with you because he, like you and me, we have to learn to build up and strengthen our faith muscle, to have faith to believe in things that seem so impossible. And for Jacob today, what he needs faith for is the color of sheep and goats. Watch this. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Genesis series. So glad you're joining us today. It has actually been about 2 months since we've done a lesson in Genesis. So yay, we're actually back. I realize that we're going to have to pick up the pace here. If we're going to actually finish Genesis before Jesus comes back, we're going to have to do a lot of reading. So today we're going to go through almost 70 verses, but it will take stops along the way because this is such a big portion of the story. But of course, I have to start with a joke that depicts me, especially when we just got done with The Plan series, and then we had our Christmas break, and it was just it's been a long stretch since we've been back here. So when I picked Genesis back up, I couldn't even remember where we were. Okay, so here's my joke. An elderly man moved into a retirement community, and he made a number of friends, especially this one woman, and she was attracted to him, he was attracted to her. So one evening he decided to propose to her. He wanted to ask her to marry him. The next morning he woke up remembering his proposal, but he could not remember what her answer was. So he went to her and he said, "I'm so incredibly embarrassed." He said, "But I proposed to you last night, but I can't remember if you said yes or if you said no." And she said, "Oh, I'm so thankful that you said this." She said, "Because I remembered saying yes to someone, but I just couldn't remember who it was." There you go. So if you are like me, all right, you have forgotten what we were studying 2 months ago in Genesis. So we're going to catch everybody up. If you're new watching our Bible study, we're glad you're joining us. We pre-record all of our lessons. On Wednesdays in Phoenix, Arizona, we actually have a Bible study live where I teach this live. The Bible study goes up on Wednesday, the pre-recorded one, and we also videotape it, or we actually do it live in here in Phoenix. So we would love to have you. If you're ever near us, come and join us. So you can go onto our website, womensbiblestudy.com, to get all the information on that. So anyway, let's catch everybody up. We started Genesis 1 in August of 2021. We started it with, "In the beginning, God created." Then we saw Adam and Eve and how sin entered the world and how because of that our relationship with God has been separated now. Then we saw the wickedness of the earth and how God sent Noah to build an ark, and we saw all of that. And then over the last many weeks, we began to see how God has been putting into play a plan to reconcile people back to Him after this world has been just devastated by sin. And so what we've learned is that this plan started with building a nation that through the lineage of this particular man, Abraham, we'll talk about him, would come a baby born of a virgin who came from heaven. We know as Jesus, the Savior, the Messiah. So many chapters ago, we saw that Abraham, God called him from a far distant land, from actually our modern day Iraq. And as you can see here from this like lineage from Abraham to Jesus, you can see, you've got Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Jacob has a whole bunch of kids, and then down through his lineage, through King David, would come Jesus. So understand that's what's going on at this particular time in Genesis. Now, Abraham kind of has a slow start to build this nation. He has one son where this lineage would come through. He has two, but one will be this particular one that matters. His son Isaac. Isaac actually had two boys, Jacob and Esau. Here's our picture of them. Jacob is the one that's kind of sitting on the couch and reading, and this is how I depict him, probably not how they look at all. But he's very, he likes to stay home and be with his mom and cook and do things like that. Esau, on the other hand, is a little more worldly, doesn't care anything about God. Just kind of as hunting, just you picture Esau like he's hanging out in the bar. Okay, that's kind of how you think of the two. So where we are right now is in the middle of Jacob, the one that's the mama's boy and likes to cook. We're in the middle of his story, okay? We left a couple months ago, and in our last lesson, Jacob had been on the run for his life because his brother Esau, the one that probably just came from the bar, okay, he wanted to kill him. And that was his plan because Jacob lied to his dad and deceitfully took away Esau, being the firstborn, his birthright, his blessing. So he vowed as soon as his father was dead, he was going to kill Jacob. So Rebekah, Jacob's mom, sends Jacob 400 miles north to Haran, to her brother, who his name is Laban. All right, so here's a map right here. You can see all the way to the very bottom with that red line. That's where Jacob takes off from. He goes all the way, way far, 400 miles up to Haran. And it's in Haran where Jacob meets the love of his life, Rachel. Rachel is the daughter of Laban, which actually would make them cousins, but back then they intermarried and did stuff like that. But Laban, the father, was very, very, very conniving. So Jacob fell in love with Rachel and said, I'm going to work for her for 7 years. And 7 years after I'm done working, I'll marry her. And Laban's like, great, good idea. The problem was Rachel had an older sister. Her name was Leah. Apparently Rachel was really beautiful and Leah maybe not so much. But on their wedding night, Rachel and Jacob's wedding night, somehow Laban pulled like the Cinderella story, okay? Kind of hid Rachel away and kind of inserted Leah in there, and it was dark and maybe she was veiled. And Jacob has no idea that he's consummating his marriage with Leah and not Rachel. So in our last session, we talked about the dysfunction of polygamy. Because we're going to see this all through this story here, that Jacob will end up staying married to Leah, the older sister. And then he will marry Rachel. After, he's got to work another 7 years for Rachel. But Leah has a bunch of kids with Jacob. Rachel, who's the love of Jacob's life, is completely barren. She can't have any kids. This makes for a whole lot of family drama, a whole lot of dysfunction. To make matters worse, Rachel's like, I want a baby. So she gives her maid to Jacob to sleep with and have children. So she has kids by Jacob. Then Leah stops conceiving and she does the same with her maid. So apparently Jacob is just this like sex machine for all of these women. And we said last lesson that this is kind of like the Israeli version of sister wives, okay? So that's what's going on there. But we ended our last lesson in Genesis. Jacob has 10 boys and 1 daughter. And Rachel, the love of his life, actually gets pregnant. And Joseph is the son. Joseph is going to have a huge part in the balance of Genesis. So what we saw in our last lesson is how God used all of this crazy dysfunction to actually build this nation of Israel. I'll put this lineage back up here again. You'll kind of see how this all works out. It's just down there below where you see Jacob, and then you see his 2 kids by Bilhah, and then his bunch of kids by Leah, and then 2 by Zilpah, and then 2 by Rachel. And you can kind of see that this is just madness. But God used all that craziness to give each one of those boys a portion of the land of Israel after Moses comes on the scene. It was a reminder to us that no matter what was in your past, no matter what dysfunction you were raised in, that God can use anything to further his story. And our problem is we just have to let him. Now, today, before we actually get to the verses, I want to tell you where I want to go with this lesson, because I want to talk about this. I want to talk about those times in our life when we have to trust God for what seems impossible. Those times where we go, yeah, my child is too far gone. Nothing could bring him back. Yep, my sickness is too far gone. I'll never get better. My marriage is too far gone. We're heading for divorce court. My finances are too far gone. I'm going to, head to bankruptcy. See, those are the times in our life that we have to learn what it means to trust God to do something miraculous. Now, I'll tell you about our house, because this was the time that I was putting this lesson together. This was all going on. I told, if you come to Bible study, you know this. A few months ago, we actually bought a new house. Now, the interesting thing is that we weren't even looking for a house. 4 years earlier, we had moved. We had just Dusty was left at home, so we moved from a house that we lived for 30 years to a smaller house. You would laugh, it had flagstone floors. Okay, I don't know anyone that ever has flagstone floors. It wasn't even really updated. It had a pretty view of the mountains, but other than that, it's whatever. It was pretty small. We bought it. It had some acreage on there, so Rob was going to build like 3 spec homes on the acreage, and that would give him a project. We were perfectly happy there. Like there was no need to ever move. So one morning, we decided to look on Zillow. We needed to find out what the homes in the area were selling for, so Rob knew, like, okay, what if he's going to build these spec homes, what are they going to sell for? So the first thing was this house, and it popped up. And I was like, oh, we live in New River. I'm like, where is that in New River? Like, I didn't even know that view even existed. So it was 5:30 in the morning. We take a drive to this house, and we fell in love. But like I said, we're not even looking for a house. We're perfectly fine with the house that we have. So we prayed, and we said, God, here's the deal. We're going to put an offer. We're going to lowball it. If you want us to have this house, you're going to have to open every single door along the way, because we're not even looking for a house, okay? And that's exactly what God did. Every step along the way, he opened the door, and we're the proud owners of a new house, okay? A new house that now we had 2 houses. But I always felt like, since, this was seriously like a God thing, that our house would sell, our old house would sell immediately. Like, we'd put it up on the market, and then there'd be 10 people wanting to buy it. It'd be a bidding war. That's kind of what I thought. But the problem was, between signing for our new house and putting our old house on the market, the housing market pretty much crashed. It crashed. Interest rates rose to almost 8%. And now we had a house that we needed to sell that had really pretty views with flagstone floors, and people didn't want that. They're looking for brand new hardwood floors. And so we knew that in this market it would take an absolute miracle for God to sell the house. So we started trusting. And our prayers really were this: God, we have to trust you to bring a buyer along in this market. And it seems completely and utterly impossible. So we eventually put our house on the market, and this man comes along, and long story short, he decides he doesn't just want the house and the acres, he wants the entire thing. And not only that, but he wants to pay cash, and he wants to close in 2 weeks. And this is in a downturn market with flagstone floors, and it's sold. Now, the only reason why I'm telling you that long, super boring story is that 15 years ago, if this happened, I would have been freaking out. I would have been like, oh my gosh, God, we own 2 houses and I don't know what we're going to do. And I would have been worst case scenario kind of a person. Just like this video that kind of made me laugh, because I think we all do this. Someone says something and we're just automatically start thinking not of the best things, but of the worst things that could happen. Watch this. How was work?
Nothing unusual. Email was down again. And Bill called me into his office again.
What's wrong?
Nothing really. He just thinks he can come down and fit in with these blue collar guys. He's white collar.
Or you've done something wrong again, and you're getting in trouble. And you'll get demoted, then you'll stop shaving. There goes my vacation. Maybe you'll even get fired. And then you'll do that lazy thing and I'll have to go back to work. And there goes the house. We had plans for this house. We'll be living out of our car or out on the street, and eventually we'll be forced to move in with your mother.
How was your day, Kim?
Well, Dana's having a party Friday night and I thought I could go. But before you freak out, it's not going to be that big of a deal. I mean, y'all guys know her.
You're a great kid, but there's no stopping the peer pressure. It just takes one sip and you're hooked. And then there's the smoking and the piercings and the tattoos and the boys. Even good boys don't have good intentions, never mind the bad boys. Oh, and you'll go straight for one of the bad boys and they'll introduce you to all the bad things and you'll get pregnant and drop out of school and we'll never see you again. And we'll be stuck with your kid.
What about you, Mom?
I've been considering taking up string art.
No.
Desi's been doing some really wonderful things with it. You can do anything with string. Did you know you can make refrigerator magnets?
Everyone knows string art is a gateway craft. You'll start knitting and making me hats and scarves and sweaters and making me wear those sweaters. And you'll stop dyeing your hair and get those grandma glasses and you'll want a cat, which will kill my allergies and probably lead to more cats. And you'll want to make things and bring it to my class and embarrass me in front of all of my friends.
Is this a cat hair?
Here's what I realize is that peace really does come when we can learn how to trust. And not to trust God like, God, I just need you to give me what I want, but really to trust that God needs to do what he needs to do in his timing. Because for our house, I always knew this. I don't know, God, if it takes 2 years to sell the house, you apparently have a lesson for us to learn. You want to teach us something, okay? Maybe he had specific buyers he wanted to buy our house that, weren't going to move here for another year. Like, I just didn't know, but that's the thing with trusting God. It's believing God will do what needs to be done in his timing and in his way. And honestly, there really is peace in that. So what we've learned is this: do only what you can do. And for us, we had to, fix the house up and paint it, and it had to be cleaned really well. And then we had to do this: trust God for what only he can do. And that's bring along a buyer. We couldn't do that. And there's things in your life that is the same way. Maybe you've been to 5 different doctors. Maybe you've gone to marriage counseling. Maybe you've gotten your child help. Maybe you've put out 50 resumes to help your financial situation. But at some point, you have to stop and say, God, I have done everything I can do. The rest is up to you to miraculously come through. But that means, here you go, using our faith muscle. And it's just like any other muscle in our body. Like if you go to the gym, which of course I don't, but if I did, I would be working out and I would be building my muscles so that if I needed to pick up something heavy, my muscles could handle it. But the same is true with our faith muscle. It has to be stretched. We have to work at it. We have to grunt and trust God and do things. It builds our faith when we do that. Because if we don't, when we do need faith, it's not going to be there. Our faith muscle won't be strong enough. So I want to share a story about a man in the 1800s. His name is Hudson Taylor. Here's a picture of Mr. Taylor up here. Because he did something so amazing with building his faith muscle. And the story was so impactful to me that I'm like, I got to put it in this lesson. So Hudson Taylor knew he was being called in the 1800s, okay, to be a missionary to China. Okay, no one really had ever done that before. And he's studying in England and he's working, and he had a boss who was really, really busy. His boss was a doctor. And he always told Hudson, he said, look, make sure you let me know when it's payday because I don't have time. I don't look at the calendar. I don't pay much attention to anything. But Hudson knew this. He said, I knew if I was going to China that I'm going to need to trust God for way more than a paycheck. I'm going to have to learn to trust God for miraculous things, salvation, protection, guidance, money to keep going. So he would have to do what this girl in this video refused to do. Watch this.
Jesus, I just don't trust you.
You don't trust me?
No, I mean, I want to trust you. I just don't.
I have an exercise that I think will really help you.
Oh, okay.
Stand here and face this direction. Now, do you trust me?
No, I just said I don't trust you.
All right, well, this is all part of the exercise.
Oh,
all right?
right, okay.
Whenever I ask you if you trust me, you say, yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Even though I don't.
It's practice.
Okay.
So, do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Now, fall back.
Are you going to catch me?
Don't worry about that part.
Okay, that's the part I'm worried about.
You can do this, okay? Just trust me.
Trust you.
Fall back.
Okay, well, Jesus, I trust
Good.
you. Yes, I do trust you. I'm going to fall
Okay.
back. Woo!
Oh, okay.
That's great.
Let's try this again. Just face this direction and keep your feet planted. All right? Do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you.
Now, fall back.
Okay, I'm gonna do it.
All right.
I'm really gonna do it. Okay.
Good.
Whoa, Jesus, you really caught me! I didn't think you were gonna catch me, but you did!
Oh, that was great!
That was great!
You're ready for level 2.
Level 2, here
Yes.
I come, baby! Woo! Whoa!
Okay, hold it.
Oh, you know what? You're too close. You need to move back.
Right.
Okay.
This one's a little bit different, Laura.
Okay.
Stand here,
Uh-huh.
but face me.
Woo! Forward fall. I
Okay.
can do that.
Wait.
Whoa.
Okay. Wait for my signal.
Oh, right, the Jesus signal.
Yes, the Jesus signal. Do you trust me?
Yes, Jesus, I trust you so much.
Good. Fall back.
That's awesome.
It is awesome, especially when you do it.
Seriously?
Of course.
Okay, Jesus, I don't know if you noticed this, but there is nobody over there.
I know it looks that way to you.
It looks that way. It is that way.
You can do this, Laura. Just trust me and fall back.
Jesus, I can't do that.
We can do it together.
I can't.
You can.
I won't.
So, Hudson Taylor is going to have to trust the fall, okay? So back in England, he's in his job and he decides that it's payday coming up. And what he wants to do is stretch his faith muscle. So he decides he's not going to remind his boss. He's like, nope, not going to do that. I'm going to pray that God puts it upon my boss's heart and reminds him to pay me. Because Hudson needed to know that God really was that big and that much in control of turning people's hearts to do things. So here's the problem. The boss didn't remember. And Hudson just prayed. He prayed his little heart out. We'll read this. Carter Hudson from Whitworth University wrote this. As Hudson Taylor's next quarterly paycheck drew near, he prayed fervently that his employer would not forget his salary. Yet when the day came, the preoccupied doctor made no mention of his pay. The young man continued praying unceasingly, trusting that the God in whom he believed would supply his every need, including his overdue salary. But after giving his last silver coin to a family whose mother was dying and eating his last bowl of porridge for breakfast, more than a week after his salary was due, he had no provision for the next meal nor for the rent that was due to his landlord in just 3 days. Yet Hudson continued to wrestle with God over these matters in prayer. He went into work the day his rent was due with a calm inner assurance that to wait on God's timing was best and that the Lord would undertake for him in one way or another. That day, seemingly out of the blue, his employer inquired whether he had paid him his salary. Hudson calmly reminded him that it had been due some time ago and his employer was about to finally compensate him when his boss realized he had just sent the last of his money to the bank. Utterly dejected after such a temporary and premature soaring of his spirit, Hudson left his employer's office and fell to his knees, pouring out his heart to the Lord. Hudson remained in the office until 10 o'clock that night, trusting that God would not fail him. He had to pay his rent, okay? But would provide for him somehow when his employer surprisingly returned to the office laughing. He explained to Hudson that at this strange hour, one of his richest patients had just paid his doctor's bill. And because of that seemingly random act, he was able to pay the overdue salary of Hudson, as well as the subsequent one right then and there. Now, that story is very, very impressive to me, because for me, I'd be like, hey boss, it's payday. You know, after about day 2, I'd be like, I'd be panicking. But I was so amazed at Hudson. He would not budge on this, because he really honestly needed to know that God was faithful, that he would, because he's getting ready to go to leave for China. And he needs to know that God is that powerful. And what Hudson was doing was strengthening his faith muscle. But this was a reminder that sometimes God delays so we will pray more and trust more and build our faith muscle more. And I realized that that is what God wants from us. He wants us to stretch ourselves to pray, to trust him for the things that we can't. Because I know we could not sell our home in a down market. You can't heal yourself. You can't change your spouse's heart or your child's heart. But God wants us to do all of those things. He wants to do all of those things. He wants us to give those things over to him and then trust him to do what we absolutely cannot do. And he always does it in his timing. And for Hudson, it was like late, but on time. So all that to say, that's actually where we are going to find Jacob today. He's going to have to trust God for something he has absolutely no control over, and it's this: the color of sheep and goats. So that's where we're going to pick up our story today. At this point, Jacob has 11 sons and 1 daughter, and he remembers this promise that God made to him when he was on the run many, many years. It's actually been now about 20 years. 20 years before, he's running from his brother Esau, and he stops. And God comes to him like this scene where the angels, there's this ladder reaching from the earth to where Jacob was, to heaven, and the angels were coming up and down. But look at this in Genesis 28. It says, there above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. That is a huge promise from God. Jacob, you're coming back to this land. Now we know this land is the land of Israel, like, you know, where Jerusalem and the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Okay, this is the land we're talking about. It's the land that God promised him. So I'll throw this map up here one more time so you can see. Down below where he left, okay, you can see the Dead Sea down there. You can see the Sea of Galilee. He's way, way, way up in Haran. And God says, come back to the land. I will make sure you get back here. But for 14 years, he'd worked for his father-in-law, 7 to marry Rachel, and apparently 7 more years to marry Rachel again, okay? He'd worked off his debt. It's been 14 years. At this point, he's got, like I said, 11 kids. He's got a lot of people to take care of, you know, quite a few wives and a bunch of kids. And so Jacob now knows he's going to go talk to his father-in-law Laban about this. Genesis 30, verse 25, and it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. Now it makes sense. He wants to go home, okay? But I want you to imagine being Laban, all right? Because here's your daughters. Leah and Rachel were his daughters. He's got 11 grandchildren. And he knows this: if they leave, he will most likely never ever see them again, because they didn't have like planes and trains and things like that back then. So this was a shock. Verse 27, and Laban said, please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Laban knows that the reason why he's been so successful is because God has blessed Jacob. So verse 28, then he said, name your wages and I will give it. So apparently he thinks that Laban, or that Jacob, just is a ploy, you know, to try to get more money from him. Verse 29, but so Jacob said to him, you know how I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming, and now when shall I also provide for my household? Jacob's like, I want to go. I don't want to be under your thumb. I don't want to be under your rule. I want to have a place for my family. So Jacob comes up with an idea, a plan, how to make this fair. That he would continue to work for Laban for actually another 6 years, but God would have to build his flock. Now watch this in verse 31. So he said, well, what shall I give you? Laban's like, all right, what do you want? And Jacob said this, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. But let me pass through all your flocks today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. Now, I'll show you some pictures. Sheep are usually white, okay? They're supposed to be white. But genetically, sometimes every once in a while, you would have a sheep born with some black on it. Here's a cute little picture here. Here's, you see all the white sheep, and then there's that one with a little black face, okay? Here's another one. You can see all these sheep with all these speckled on their faces. Here's another one. You can see sheep with, the black and the white. And then over here, the next picture you'll see are some goats, and they're not solid. There's some that have different colors in them and stuff like that. So in reality, this is not a very good deal for Jacob, but at least there could be no cheating from Laban, okay? Because if one of Laban's sheep or goats would have a baby, and if there was speckled or anything on him, it would have to go right into Jacob's flock. Verse 33 says this, so my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it's with me. And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word. Laban's like, cha-ching, all right? Jacob could never build a flock of anything with just speckled sheep and goats. Like there just aren't that many of them. And in Laban's mind, he's probably like, yes, he's going to live with me forever. Which brings me to my one and only goat joke I've ever found, okay? Here you go. 2 hunters were out hunting. They came upon what appeared to be like an abandoned farm. The barn was sagging, the house was in disrepair, there were junk cars and car parts all over. The only thing that made it look like a working farm was a couple chickens and a goat that was wandering around. So as they entered the yard, they saw this well, and it looked really, really deep, a water well. So they started talking. They're like, hey, I wonder how deep that is. They go, I don't know. Let's throw something in it and see how far down this well goes. So they looked around, and they found an old transmission laying there. So they picked it up and just threw it into the well, and went down, 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 and then splash. And they're like, wow, that's a deep well. They turned to leave, and suddenly they saw this goat, and it was charging them, and his head was down, and his horns were out and heading straight for them. And at the last moment, they jumped aside. The goat went right past them, straight over and down into the well. And they were like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And as they started to leave, the owner shows up, the owner of the farm. And he goes, have you seen my goat? And they said, well, your goat almost killed us. He charged at us. You should have that goat tied up. And the farmer said, I thought I did. I thought I tied him up to that old transmission. Okay. Sorry, the only goat joke I could find. There you go. But Laban forgets this, that when it comes to speckled and spotted and colored, Laban forgets that Jacob has a powerful God in the picture who can do anything. All right, and that's kind of the point for today. Verse 35, so he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hands of his sons. And then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flock. So they separate Jacob's 3 days away with Laban's sons. And Jacob stays there with Laban, and he's going to be Laban's shepherd. And then we see this next section, and this causes a lot of confusion to people because Jacob is supposed to be, a follower of the one true God. We've got the father, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all right? But this whole scene seems like there's this superstitious weird stuff going, but I don't think that's what's happening. So let's read it in context. Verse 37. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, peeled white strips in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. Now, at first reading, it seems like this is some weird superstitious thing that they do. You peel it and then you set it up, and then the sheeps are going to, come and conceive speckled babies. Like a lot of people take it like that, but that's actually not what it says. Look at it again. And the rods which he peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, so they should conceive when they came to drink. So it seems like it's saying that Joseph peeled these trees, he put the sticks in the water, the females would come up to drink, and that's where the males would come up behind them and mate with them while they were drinking at the trough. So you say, okay, well, what is the big deal about these trees? Answers in Genesis says this. Several sources claim the poplar and almond trees have medicinal properties for both human and livestock. There are several scientific journal papers that mention that this particular trees from which Jacob peeled sticks supposedly cure urogenital problems, reduce fevers, work as anti-inflammatories, and aid in reducing reproductive disorders. All of these would make an animal healthier and more likely to produce healthy offspring. Several studies have been done on poplar and almond tree bark, leaves, nuts, and twigs. Such diameter branches are what Scripture calls sticks, and they mentioned that sheep would eat these and that ewes especially benefited from them. Also, many of the chemical compounds would still be beneficial, even by simply steeping in water. Now, maybe there was a better taste, maybe it tasted sugary, maybe being in the water is what attracted the sheep there in the first place. Like, we don't really know. But verse 39 says this, so the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Now, you know, I know, and I'm pretty sure Jacob knew that the only reason why they came out like that was because God was doing something miraculous. It wasn't because Jacob put some stuff in the water, okay? Verse 40, then Jacob separated the lambs, made the flocks face toward the streaked and all the brown in the flock of Laban, but he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flocks. Now, Jacob was a shepherd. He knew healthy sheep from weak sheep. So I don't think he was doing anything superstitious. I think he was probably just really good at his job. I think he was trying to build a healthy flock, and it seemed like what he was doing, this just made sense to build this particular flock with all these nutrients in the water with these trees. Verse 41. It came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutter, that they may conceive among the rods. Seems like the sheep, like I said, were mating and conceiving by the water troughs. But the flocks, verse 42, but when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger's Jacob. Seems a little sneaky, but okay. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Now, all that to say, I don't know anything about being a shepherd back in the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but I assume Jacob knew a lot of things that you and I don't know. But Jacob also knew that God would have to bless this endeavor if this flock was ever going to be built. And he knew that because Jacob knew the promise God had made him that he would get back to the land of Israel. But in order for that to happen, okay, Jacob had to trust God to provide this large flock big enough to take care of his family and to get him back into the land where he was supposed to go. And I think there's a lesson for us. There's going to be a point in our life when the only choice and the best choice is to say this. God, this will take a miracle, but I trust that you can do miraculous things. And Jacob really did stand on that promise, which was a reminder that I think that Jacob would have been a mess had he not known God. And I think this, that we live in a mess, we will be a mess living in this world if we don't know what God has promised to us. Jacob knew the promise of God. I'm going to get you back to the land. Don't worry. He trusted that. And for us, we have to know the promises of God so we can stand on them, which is why we always say, you got to read your Bible, okay, to find out what God has promised us. Because we know, just like Jacob knows, the 7 years and the additional 7 years and now the additional 6 years, that there's times when our faith will be tried. And the goal in our life is going to be what Job says in Job 23:10. But he knows the way I take. When he has tested me, I will come forth as gold. See, that's what we want. We don't want to walk away from our faith. We want our faith to become like gold. We saw this the other night. We were watching a 2020, and this guy is wrongly convicted of killing his wife. 30 years ago. They say he did it. He didn't. They have evidence nowadays, 30 years later, that proves, DNA and all this stuff, that he didn't do it. They actually have the killer, the guy who has confessed to killing. But the guy that they wrongly accused is still in prison. They won't let him out. It's the weirdest thing ever. But what's amazing is that this guy is a Christian, and his faith doesn't waver. God is using him in prison, but every time he gets this glimmer of hope, like, yes, I'm going to get out, it's just dashed, okay? And what happens is this, that he lets Jesus come and restore his soul again and again, and then he keeps on going. And I think the lesson is the same. Jacob had to deal with it. This man does. Sometimes we do in our life. That when things go south for us, when they're rough days in our life, rough years, okay? Don't give up. Don't walk away. Let God come in, just like he did with Jacob. Restore your soul to keep on going right where you're at. And Jacob understands this because he wants to go home. All right, he wants to go back to his dad and his family 400 miles away. I always like to put this little map up so you can see he's a long way from his home. But he wants to take that trip and go all the way down. But his father-in-law is so deceptive, and Jacob really honestly can't trust him. So now it's been another 6 years after the 14. But during these 6 years, God has built this amazing flock of speckled and sheep and goats and colored and all of those things. And now he has to trust God, like, all right, God, I got the flock, but I don't know when I'm supposed to leave. We pick it up in Genesis 31. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father. So Leah and Rachel, his wife's brothers, okay, are saying, they're just talking smack about Jacob. And verse 2 says, and Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude towards him was not what it had been. So suddenly Jacob's hearing the gossip and the brothers, blaming Jacob for this and that. And here's what I want to just throw out to you. That sometimes God does this when he's ready to move you. Because circumstances change. This was a changed circumstance. Laban has always loved Jacob. The brothers probably loved Jacob. And suddenly now there's all this animosity and weird stuff going on. And for you, might not be that. It could be, you got a new boss. And now you don't have favor with this new boss. Maybe that you're going to school and this one particular teacher just doesn't like you and won't give you good grades. Maybe you got a demotion from your company because it was sold. Maybe God starts moving on your heart to okay, it's time to move. It's time to move out of state. And for Jacob, the circumstances were changing, and his once favored status now was going south. Because now his family was being built. He had 11 sons and a daughter, and I think at this point the speckled sheep and goats were built, and God says, Jacob, it's time to go. Look at verse 3. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. It's a great promise. And he probably feels so great, yes, I can finally get out of here. But here's the problem. He's married to Laban's 2 daughters, and he needs to know that his daughters are on his side. This made me laugh. There's a story of a daughter that she was about to be married, but she said to her mom, she had a really close relationship with her dad, and she said, Mom, I want to get married, but I feel sad. I don't really want to leave Dad. And the mom smiled and said, honey, I understand, and I don't want to stand in the way of your happiness, so why don't you just take your dad with you? Okay, perfect. But I assume that's what Jacob was hoping his wives would not say, like, hey, just, can we bring Daddy Laban with us, all right? Verse 4 says this, so Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. And he said, I see that your father's attitude towards me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. I love how Jacob finally is like, it's all about God. He's doing this for me. He brings God into the equation. Verse 6, he says, you know I've worked for your father with all of my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. Jacob worked for him even though he knew that his father was cheating him. And it's just a reminder to those of you that feel that way, like you work for someone who isn't that nice and you're being cheated and you're not being treated very fairly. And yet Jacob goes to work every day and just trusts God. And that's a good reminder that we need to do the same thing. But look at what Jacob goes on in verse 7. He says, however, God has not allowed him to harm me. Like, yeah, you can do all those things, but you can't harm me. Verse 8, if he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. He trusted God to do it, and God came through for something miraculous. So, verse 10, in breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I have seen. Never forget, God is the God who sees. He does. He sees everything you're going through. You're being mistreated. Your husband's a jerk. Your kids are acting like this. Well, he sees, okay? He's not forgotten you. And never think like, God just doesn't understand. He does. He sees every single thing that's happening in your life. That's why you can trust him, because nothing is shocking to him. So, he reminds Jacob of this. God says this in verse 13, I am the God of Bethel. Okay, now I'm going to put our map back up here because I want you to see that when he leaves at the very bottom, he goes up a little way, and the first place that he stopped is Bethel. Remember, at this time, he's running from his brother. And this is where the ladder, the Jacob's ladder, to heaven, this is that whole scene right there. But he said, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Jacob worshiped God at Bethel. And now for Jacob, it was time for him to get back to worshiping God. Go back to the land where you can worship again. Because I think for Jacob, he'd gotten so far away from the land, his family, his God. He got caught up in the world. And, he was having to have sex with all these women all the time. And he had all these kids. And there was just so much going on. And I think he probably has forgotten God for a portion of that time. And I think it's easy for us to do. It's like our job, our family, our hobby, our sports, our dance, our gym, whatever it is. Like we tend to do all those things and forget our relationship with God. And God is like, Jacob, I want you to come back. Remember my relationship with you at Bethel. Come back. Let's get back to that. Verse 14. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. It sounds like these girls are seriously bitter with their father. Verse 16, surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children, so do whatever God has told you. So Jacob knows it's time to leave. Rachel and Leah are in agreement, which is a good thing. So verse 17, then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Now this is a problem, all right? Household idols is another translation. Apparently Laban had some kind of pagan influence in his home. The idols could have been worth a lot of money. Some people thought that maybe they were like figurines, and Rachel wanted to take them as a reminder of her homeland. But the Hebrew word actually means idol, so that doesn't sound good. But Rachel steals them, all right? And she doesn't tell Jacob, her husband, at all. He has no idea that she did this. Verse 20 says this, moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So now you've got this scene where like Laban's off, 3 days ride that way, and Jacob gets everything together and they are booking it. They are on the run. They're leaving this particular town. I bet fast, like this pastor in Alabama named Bill. He was driving to speak to another church in another country, in a county, but he was running really late. So he was driving 20 miles over the speed limit. But then he suddenly remembered he had a Christian bumper sticker on his car. And his conscience started, giving him fits. Like, what do people think when you whip past them doing 20 miles over the speed limit? So he faced this moral dilemma, and so he didn't really know what to do. So he pulled over and he pulled off the road and ripped off the bumper sticker. Jumped back in his car and kept speeding. I was laughing. I thought, oh, that's one way to do it. But at this point, God told Jacob to leave. But instead of being honest, waiting for Laban to come back, sitting down, man to man, having a conversation, he did not do that. All right. He took off and left. And literally, he was fleeing like a criminal. Verse 21 says this, so he fled with all he had, and crossing the river, he headed for the hill country of Gilead. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. And I bet Laban is furious, absolutely furious. But then there's this moment, but God. We always talk about those moments, but God steps in and does something amazing. Verse 24 says this, then God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream at night, and said, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. In other words, you better hold your tongue. All right. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done? Like, you've deceived me and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of tambourines and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren or my daughters goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. He said, I have the power to harm you. But last night, the God of your father said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. It's verses like this that remind me God is that big and that close and that intricately involved in our lives. And when we really honestly take that to heart, it is life-changing to us. There is no need to worry and be fearful because God is really that powerful. He shows up in a dream to Laban. Like, that's kind of a big deal. Verse 30. Now you have gone off because you long to return return to your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Remember, Jacob knows nothing what Rachel does. Verse 31, Jacob answered Laban. He said, well, first, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. That's understandable. But then on the other hand, I'm like, Jacob, serious? Like, God has given you a promise, you and your family, to get back in the land. Why would you be worried about that? Man up, Jacob, okay? But then I realized I do the same thing. I'm like, oh, God, I trust you. And then the next minute I'm like, but what if God doesn't come through? Like, I think we just do that. We're just human. So Jacob says something to his father-in-law that probably terrified Rachel. He says, but if you find anyone who has your gods, he shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel, his favorite wife, had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the 2 maidservants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period. So he searched but could not find the household gods. She literally lies to her dad so that he won't look underneath in her saddle that she's sitting on. But it's sad that those household gods meant so much to Laban. Verse 36, Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. What is my crime? He asked Laban. What sin have I committed that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for 20 years that I was in your household. I worked for 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. I love that. Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine, yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine, or about the children they have borne? I think Laban realizes that God is very much involved in Jacob's life. And I think that dream must have freaked him out, so he knows he needs to make peace, or he's never going to see his family again. Verse 44, now come now, let's make a covenant, okay, a promise between you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar-Shadutha, and Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, the heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Gilead. It was also called Mitzpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is my witness between you and me. I laughed. It's like, Jacob, you better not mistreat my daughters. Even though I lied to you and put my older daughter in, and you married her, and there's so much deception going on with Laban. I just laugh when he says this. Verse 51, Laban also said to Jacob, here's this heap and here's this pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. And after they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. And now Jacob and his family are finally on their way back to the promised land, the land that God promised them. I'll put our map up one last time. As you can see, now they are starting at the top and they are heading down, making their way back to their homeland. So the lessons that I want us to learn today is this. The first one is this: start trusting God for things you have no control over. I had no control over the sale of our house. You have no control over things like your kids, your husband, your money, your health, your addiction, your grandchildren, your jobs. Whatever you have no control over, you need to stop. You need to say, God, I'm giving them to you. They are now going to be yours. You take care of them. I am trusting you. And in the midst of that, we see Jacob had to do that with the sheep and the goat. He has no control over what color they're born with. But he had to start using his faith muscle, which means I want us to do that too. We need to start using, you need to, and I need to, our faith muscle. Start using your faith muscle. Start working that muscle out. Start trusting God and stop worrying, okay? That's how you get your faith muscle stronger. Whenever you get that phone call in the middle of the night, that pink slip, the bad news from the doctor, whatever it is that you're worried about, you stop and you say, nope, I'm using my faith muscle. and I'm handing this problem over to God, and I'm trusting Him that He will take care of it. When you start to worry about something, you stop and say, nope, not going to worry about it. I'm using my faith muscle and allowing God to handle this for me. And here's what you need to know too. If things start changing in your life and you feel God is moving you to do something new, go someplace new, get the new job, do whatever, then you know what? Step out in faith and trust God to get you to that new place. But here's what you need to know, and this will set us up for next week's lesson, is that in that new place, it could be the new job, the new marriage, the new city, the new neighborhood, there still are going to be scary things that happen. And we're going to see this with Jacob. Because after stepping out in the next couple weeks, he's going to come face to face with his brother Esau, who vowed to kill him the 20 years before. But before that happens, Jacob and God are going to have a wrestling match. We'll talk about that next week. I hope this helped you today. Let's build our faith muscle. Have a really good day.